Um, you have this, yeah, so this big fish story with miracles. His teachings been more shocking to the political system during that day, so as to satisfy the Christians' naturalism to a conclusion where they go, well, yeah, that for what he did in his day, he was definitely like a revolutionary, and of course they would have put him to death. Uh, but what's missed in Mark, if you study it in isolation, is that, well, no, he didn't even confess, saying he neither said no, I'm not the king of the Jews, nor yes, I am the king of the Jews. He was asked, are you the king of the Jews? And he said, well, you said it. Um, so that's not a yes, it's not a no, and it's not true. It's not true literary. Bishop Spong shares this view that he doesn't, and the Jesus Seminar, that he did not confess to be the king of the Jews. So yeah, the proceedings thereon, that and the ransom money put up for his kidnap being handed over, sent up the hill, and getting crucified. You've got a case of a kidnap, suicide, rapey murder with loincloth to when he's got a crown of thorns for the purposes of shaming him. So Um, so yeah, none of these are to be followed. Why it's interesting to watch, and I watched this happen when I was in church in the 90s, was that an interest was taken in testimonial videos about teen suicide struggles, and there was just this impulse to have an outreach sort of effort, and being sensitive to this. What about feelings of suicide in society now? So what that can be is the unrecognized. Well, Jesus, what if he was suicidal going up the hill? Someone who loves life that much and is just being kidnapped, is knows he's been punished, but is unaware of his charge and has not confessed to, well, insofar as he's aware of it, has not confessed to it. About to be crucified. If he's broken and if he had effeminate traits, it might explain why keeping the queen out of the story altogether was of interest to them. She may have hated him. She may have hated him a lot more than King Herod. Uh, he had the long hair. He had the female disciples, the male disciples. But yeah, John's gospel is the one that's with the bad stereotype on drugs. You would say it's the one written on drugs. Everything that Jesus does, all his ministry, his miracle workings, his teachings, his message, it was all planned by God at the start. And he died for your sins. He died for you, and they elaborate off that yeah, he died for you, wants a relationship with you. How much do you love me, Jesus? And he stretched out his arms this much and then died, and things like that they'll say. Jesus, take the wheel when they're driving, and then they crash. Jesus when they're in bed, and then they divorce. So that this man's, insofar as if you're going to invest all these hours giving attention to these gospels, then I mean, hasn't he, as Bill Maher said, hasn't he suffered enough? Sarah Palin, in America, said she believes that Jesus will return within 20 years. And yeah, Bill Maher said, in response to her, he said, hasn't Jesus suffered enough? Yeah. So that's basically. As for why I think he could have been an unrecognized bisexual is are these the sociology of him being of educative assistance to women and men. Uh, long he's portrayed to always have long hair. He certainly very gentle in the and sweet in the gospel in the Markan texts. Yeah, it's the recognition that he did not merit being executed. So yeah. Now, with the religiosity in people and in exchanges with the bisexual community, counseling insensitivities arising, and perhaps the staff having the sense that they've been asked out of line questions in that this might not be that their sort of conservatism present in exchanges, verbal exchanges and conversations. But the religious mind, I think, senses the bisexual mind to be wrong in very fundamental ways that make mediating and establishing healthy reciprocity in a relationship difficult, and one is marginalized. Uh, now, so yeah, if I don't get what it means if a person says, "Well, I'm not a big believer in the Genesis story. I just don't. It's the Queen's religion. I don't oppose it." Like, well, you're not opposing the Queen by opposing it, and but why haven't you accepted it? Like, in saying what you've said, it suggests to me that or if you hope that it's true, so that you live forever and you've scarcely researched the Bible at all. In terms of errors that get learnt, if testimony, so plagiarism is in principle taught because taught to be acceptable. The content of plagiaristic efforts has veracity and is acceptable, even if the manuscript comes 10 to 15 years after its source was written, and then another 10 years after that. And because of the way that the supernaturalism just expands from scaling along from Mark through Matthew and Luke and then to John, I would think, yeah. What if you lived back then? And you were privileged enough to get near papyrus manuscript and have the chance to write any kind of documentary or record. You wouldn't be writing anything. I think that would be deemed offensive to the ancient king and queen, the ruling class. So fear for your own safety would have been a factor there if Jesus' killing was an unjust one, and that's what I think the loincloth signifies. This is that this is, yeah, an offense. So it did things like made a story that the people could relate to. They had this a celebrity character. The king and queen had no blood on their hands, and the scribes that wrote down the other three gospels later went on to live a life devoid of threat. So the Freemasons' view is that Jesus was a martyr, but